Good evening, everybody. It's nice to still be with you. All right, so like this morning, we've got some photos to show you so you don't have to look at us. So these will just, slide on by behind us. So thank you for having us here again tonight. I think pretty much almost everybody that's here was here this morning, correct? So, couple, yeah, okay, so.
Barry and Olga are here tonight, but they weren't here.
Barry and Olga, okay. Well, we're Paul and Sharon from the Dominican Republic. We've been down there since 1997. We have a couple of kids. There they are right there, Noah and Samantha. They're currently in Alberta. They're at that stage of life where they're just starting to spread their wings. So Noah just got a job and Sam's just preparing to head off to college. So we're going to do the whole empty nest thing all in one sweep. So I don't know how we'll do, but that's the way it's working out. No one said, everybody told me, like the first one goes, it's really tough. But, by the time the second one goes, you're used to it. No one said it was going to happen at the same time. So I don't know about that. Anyway, so you can keep us in your prayers and our kids in your prayers. We'd really appreciate that with all of our changes this year. So this evening, being that we spoke this morning, we thought that we'd do this evening a little bit different and not just give you a bunch of facts and all that boring stuff, statistics and everything. So we thought we'd share some stories. So we're going to share some stories from over the years, and then at the end, we're going to have a little bit of time for question and answer. So if you want to ask us anything, we're going to open the floor and let you do that. So you can start thinking of anything if you want to ask us anything, and if not, then we'll just close in prayer. So the first story I'm going to share, and we're going to pop back and forth, tell our different stories that we were involved in. And we all know that God provides, and that that was shared this morning as well. We hear that quite often, and we've all experienced that God does provide for us. But sometimes we have not a clue where that's going to come from. And a number of years back, the kids were still small. They were like around 6 and 8 or 7 and 9, somewhere around there. And we've always, from day one, had a very firm pact that we don't go into debt. God did not send us on the mission field to go into debt. That is not what our support is supposed to be going to do, to pay off debts. So when we left in the mission field, we had no debt, and praise God, we never have. But we do have credit cards for emergencies. So, but we try very hard never to use them. And it was one of those times where our support was quite low, and we hadn't had much support for a while, and we needed groceries in the house. That's a need. That's not a want. So we weren't going down the want avenue. We weren't looking for the 80-inch TV. We were just looking to put some food on the table that night. And where we are situated in the Dominican Republic, we're up in the mountains. So we're on the tallest mountain in the West Andes called Pico de Huarte, which is 10,400 feet, and we live at about 2,000 feet. And so we have to come off the mountain because we don't have a lot of resources available to us, especially going back about 12, 14 years. And so about once every 6 weeks, my girlfriend and I, another fellow missionary, we would get together and we'd go down to the city of Santiago, which is just over an hour drive away, and we do a big grocery shop that would last us 4, 6, 8 weeks. And so it was that time. The cupboards were bare. We needed some food. I really was not sure how I was making dinner that night. And it was time to head down to Santiago. And we timed it with our mail plane. We have a mail plane that comes in once a month, brings our mail in and takes it out, and we have to go to the airport to pick it up. So we'd always go down to the Santiago airport, get our mail, and then do a big shop and come back up. And I said to Paul the night before, we need groceries, but we don't have the cash. I don't know how we're going to pay for it. And so we talked about it and took the decision, well, we're going to put it on credit card and just trust that the Lord's going to provide the funds to pay the credit card before the bill arrives and the interest starts getting applied to it. And so we made that decision. This was a need. This wasn't a want. And so off we went. So I always met my friend in town. And the only reason I'm speaking in past tense is because she's off the mission field now, down in North Carolina. And so Esther and I would always meet up in town because she lived on the opposite side that I did. And so I was heading into town to meet up with her. I was about a block or two away from our meeting point, and a vehicle's coming towards me. And this white arm sticks out of the driver's seat, and it's flagging me down to stop. And it's a small road. All of our roads are really small. And we're stopped in the middle of the road, and I roll down the window, and she just reaches out, and she goes, "Here, take this. I was having my prayer time this morning, and God told me to come to town and drive down this road and find you and hand you this envelope. And traffic's piling up, and she rolls up her window, and she drives off." It's like, okay. All right, so I just kind of put the envelope down, and I continue to drive because I'm blocking traffic too. And I go a few more blocks and stop to wait for my friend Esther. And my friend Esther is one of those people that you love them to death, but they're notoriously late. She's always late. I don't think she was on time for her wedding. She's just always late. And so I was waiting for Esther to show up, and I opened up the envelope, and in that envelope was enough money for groceries. So God does provide even when we're not sure where it's coming from. Your turn.
All right. Okay, so part of our ministry, what we have down there is a medical clinic. It's more of a walk-in doctor consult. And at one point, we were needing a doctor for the ministry. And so we were asking around a bit and trying to find a doctor. And somebody came to us and said, there is a doctor who's looking for work, and she would like to give you her name and see if you're interested in talking with her. So we got her name, and we said, yes, we'd like to talk with her. We invited her to come and have an interview with us. And as we were talking with her, the connection really started. We really could connect with her. We really felt she was a strong Christian. She was married. She had 3 children. She was working at a government clinic at the moment. And she really wanted out of that and get into ministry type work. And there was a real connection there. And so we're like, yeah, this is sounding good, but we'll pray about it and see what it goes. And as we prayed about it, and that we really felt confident with this. So we said yes. So we called and we hired her. And after we were hired, she shared with us a story of her experience. So she was really wanting to get out of this government clinic and get into something else. She was a strong prayer warrior, and she went off to a private place, like they like to go off to the mountains or by the river and have a prayer time. And she went off and had a prayer time. And in her prayer time, she heard an audible voice say to her, it says, "You need to speak to this gringa called Sharon." And she's never heard that name. Sharon's not a Dominican name or anything. And so she didn't know who we were. This was before this interview and everything. And so she started asking around, and that's how she got our names, and that's how she ended up coming to us. And she just really felt that it was the Lord calling her to work there with us. And then confirmation came when we had the interview and talking with her, and it was a really good fit. And now she's been working with us now for 14 years. She's been working. She's been a huge blessing to the ministry. It's a really encouraging, and I'm going off script here. Okay. It's really encouraging when you're in ministry and it gets the local staff come on board, and you're wondering, are they doing it for ministry, or are they doing it because we're foreigners and they think they can get something more out of it? She is there to serve the Lord. Another ministry came into town recently, and it's a large ministry with a lot of money and big organization and big visions and that. And they came and they talked with us. It all sounded really good, and we're like, we told them some information and stuff. They moved into town, and as soon as they moved into town, they called up Sharon and said, "We want to hire your doctor." And we're like, well, no, she's working for us. We need her. We can't let her go. And just left it at that. A few months down the road, we were talking with Wendy, and Wendy and I we were talking, and Wendy says, well, we mentioned about them asking us to hire her. And she said, well, that makes a lot of sense now. I was like, what? She says, they called me 4 times asking me to leave your ministry and come work with them. And they were offering me 3 times the pay that I'm getting here. And she says, no, I'm here working because this is where the Lord's called me to work. And that's an encouragement to all of us, is that because we feel called there, but it's the Lord who is providing the people for us to work there and calling them, right? Okay, so the other story I have is about a house. So with the construction part of our ministry, what we do with the construction, and just a little recap, I didn't really touch on this too much, there is we take on a project of a house to build. And this is a family that's in great need. So they don't have the resources to buy the materials to build their own home. They're just getting by with what they can. And they're living in literally a shack. And you'll see some of the pictures of the houses that are just slabs of planks of wood put together on this. And this one lady, young girl, she was a single mother. Her husband left. He was a bit abusive and just left her. And she was living in a small little shack that was about the size. She had a king-size bed, and that took up the whole building. And the roof material that was on that was a special type of roofing that was it was cardboard. And it was old, secondhand, just scrap stuff that was on there. And when it rained, it just soaked the mattress and soaked the place. So we wanted to build, so she applied for help. When we have a construction project, they have to apply for help. And we look at their application so we can know a little bit about them and know what's, their situation. And we take that to a local board so that we can confirm that, yes, they have a need. And she did have a need. We knew the family. We knew her mother, who was a widow, but her mother offered her a little piece of property off of her lot that she could build a house. So we took on the challenge to build a small, it was a two-bedroom house with an open area for a little kitchenette, little eating area, and a little living room, and a single shed roof type thing on it, tin roof on it. And this is what we were going to build for her. And we had it all lined up because we used the teams to come down and help us build the house. So the teams will come down, they'll bring down the money for the materials, and we'll work on the house. And we use the team's labor to help with that, and it's all part of a way of evangelizing. So as we were getting prepared to do this project was going to start back just before COVID hit. And the team was supposed to come down on the day that Canada closed its borders. So they couldn't come. So here we are, tore down her old little house, got the foundation done and ready to start laying block, and I have no team to come. So what are we going to do? Well, God steps in and provides. The teams continued to send the funds down to help build, and through other offerings, we got that house built for them, and we hired a couple local people to help us build it, and I think we were done by the summer of 2020 in getting that house. And now they're living in that house. It's safe, dry, and comfortable, and very blessed.
All right, so this morning I shared a little bit about the wheelchair team that's starting to come down. So I wanted to share a story or two more about that whole group. So Jamie, the gentleman that is the spearhead behind it, our redneck friend, we met him through a very interesting connection. A doctor had come down on one of our medical teams. He was a neonatal specialist from upstate New York who had just recently retired to North Carolina, and we were coming through on a furlough, speaking at churches, and he invited us to his area. And so we were in the area, and he says to Paul, I got there's this guy at the church. I have to take you by him, and you have to meet him, because he's quite the character. But he's a handy guy. And at the time, Jamie was working on a Habitat for Humanity house in his area, and that's where we met him. And that was over 20 years ago. And so then we fast forward to now, and now Jamie's bringing down these wheelchair teams. So like I said, we've got a story for every wheelchair that there is right now. And one of the stories is a young man named Christian. And Murray, you might be familiar with him. He's in my book. And Christian was born, and that's when I first met the neonatal specialist. He was born very premature. He was less than 2 pounds, and he was I think it was around 6 months gestation, so about 3 months premature. And he was born at the beginning of December, and the doctors down in La Vega, they put an IV in his foot when he was first born, and they left it there for 4 weeks, where it got infected and started to go a little bit gangrene. And the day before Christmas, sent mom home with Christian and said, there's nothing more we can do. He's going to die. And when he was first born, they told his mom, who was 17 years old at the time, by the way, don't breastfeed, because that will just make him sicker. So by the time that Christian came home, she couldn't breastfeed anymore, because she hadn't even started to breastfeed. And so Christmas morning, there's this knock on our door, and it's Christian's aunt, Julie. And they asked if we would come and help. And we go, and we're like, there is nothing. This is like so far out of our realm. This is not anything that we're capable of helping you with. But then I remembered our new friend Bill is a neonatal specialist. And so I called him up, and I explained the situation. I went, is there anything that we can do? And over the course of the next 6 months, with almost daily phone calls with Bill, we administered antibiotics and various medications, and Aunt Julie, had recently had a baby, and she took on breastfeeding Christian and her daughter, Winifred, at the same time, and for 2 years breastfed Christian. And Christian, because of all of the early premature birth, he is mentally impaired, and he does not walk that well. He shuffles around on his butt, basically. But he remembers faces. He might not be able to speak, but he remembers faces. And every time I walk by his house, his arms go up, and he's got a big hug for me. And Christian is now 19 years old. And so he was, when Jamie was coming down with the wheelchairs, I'm bringing it back again. When Jamie was coming back with the wheelchairs, I'm like, we got to get Christian in here. Christian needs a chair. He's never had a chair. And Liliana's mom is about yay tall and maybe 80 pounds soaking wet. I don't think she's gained an ounce from when she was like 7. She's just this tiny little thing. And she's lugging around her son, Christian, who is now at least 6 inches taller, but dead weight because he can't walk. And she carries him everywhere. I'm just like, I don't know how you do this, Liliana. How you carry Christian, like even from bed to couch, let alone all the way down to us. But she does, and she's like, it is getting exhausting. You can see it. She's just an exhausted mom. By the way, she's since had like 4 other kids, so it's a full house. And so we invited them to come if they wanted a wheelchair to come and get evaluated. And so they brought Christian down, and he got evaluated, and he got one of the very first chairs, and we put him in that chair, and he was instantly starting to move about, and that smile on his face, it did not leave at all. And so it's really it's such a blessing to us to be able to see this little baby that we saw born, and now 19 years later, and being able to witness how God has touched his life and his family's life throughout all the years of all of his needs and his growth. And right from, the doctor saying, take him home, he'll be dead before the end of the year. And God went, no, that's not the plan for this young man. So that's one of the stories. Another story from the wheelchairs is a young lady named Vanessa. And we didn't know Vanessa before this. Her mom heard about, we were advertising about the wheelchairs for families that had no other way to get a chair for their loved ones. And she heard about it, and she wasn't going to bring her daughter, because her daughter is 22 years old. Her name is Vanessa. She has cerebral palsy. She was born with cerebral palsy. And at this stage of her life, she cannot move. She cannot bend. So she cannot sit. So the last 2 years, she has been in her little bedroom, lying on her tummy, and her entire world consists of the wall in front of her and the wall beside her. And not even the whole wall, because she can't turn her head. So that's been her world for 2 years. And her mom was like, well, she can't sit in a wheelchair. What's the point in bringing her? But a friend really encouraged her and brought her. And the guys evaluated her, and, tough case. I'll definitely admit that. It was a tough case. How do you put a wheelchair for someone who cannot sit? And they said, no, I think we can do something with this. And so they went back home, and they came back down in May, and they had taken the backs of 3 wheelchairs, and they built a wheelchair that lies flat. And so we called Vanessa and said, her mom said, we've got the chair's coming in, come here on this date. The guys are going to fit Vanessa in it. So she comes, and the guys put her there, and they put her on her back. It was the first time Vanessa had been on her back looking up in over 2 years. And the smile was priceless. And now Mom can push her out. They don't go too far, but they can get her into the wheelchair, and they can push her out onto the front porch, or they can push her down the road a little bit, and she gets to see some of the world now. And it's just amazing to see that transformation so instantaneously. And it's all God. That's all it is. We're just his tools. But all of these things, it's just God. So.
All right.
One more story and then Q&A. So start getting ready.
Thinking. Don't pay attention to me. Just start thinking of questions, right? No, so the whole reason we do this work is for evangelism, is for sharing the gospel message with people, is for trying to bring people one step closer to putting their faith in Jesus Christ. And we were taught early on about evangelism, and one thing, the example they said, it's like if you take a line and you put 10 points on that line, point 1 is they don't know anything about Jesus. They've never heard the name. Point 10 is somebody putting their faith and praying and committing their life to Jesus, right? And we come along and we share a little bit about Jesus to somebody, and we help to move that person one step along or 2 steps along. And eventually we get the blessing to move the person from somewhere like 8 or 9 all the way to 10 and pray with them as they commit their lives to Christ. Quite often we think that's evangelism. But evangelism is the whole thing along. And people are involved in that don't even know it, that they've been used by God to help move that person one step along. So I got the privilege one day, I was going through the community where we work quite a few years ago, and I came across a new family in the community. It was a young family. The wife is in a wheelchair. The husband, he does gardening, yard work, stuff like that, and they got a couple little kids. And so I got talking with them, and I said, I explained who I was, what I'm doing there, and I would be willing to come and start a Bible study with you and share. And they were like, please, sure, come, do that. So I started doing this. I sitting in their house, and I'm looking at the walls, and I see a picture of another missionary family that I know in town on their wall. And I said, well, who are they? Oh, well, that's so-and-so. They start telling me the story. This person heard about the accident that put her in the wheelchair. They got to know her because they were working in another community where they used to live, and they've been helping her, and they've been sharing the gospel with her. And so in our Bible studies, I found out that there was another missionary that helped them before that. And of course, when I started the Bible study, I always start really trying to find out where they stand biblically. Like, do they know the gospel message? Do they know who Jesus is? And so I walked them through that. And then I asked them, I said, have you ever committed your life to Christ? And they said, no. I said, are you willing to? Do you want to do that now? And they said, yes. And so I got to pray with them and one evening for the husband and the wife to accept Christ in their lives. I was privileged to be used by God in that one step to move them the one closer. But more important to me, what was really exciting to me, I mean, that's the best part, of course, them accepting Christ, but really exciting to me is I got to see that there was so many people involved in that process. and we don't know it. We don't know the chances or the things that you've done when you've talked to somebody and shared a little bit of love about them, and they recognize and they say, oh, there's something different about that person. They mentioned something about God. And that was all. And it was just a comment you said, but it was something that sat there. It's a seed, and it grows. And then somebody else comes and builds on that, and somebody else comes and builds on that. And it's so encouraging when we get the privilege to be able to see that come through. And then one day somebody comes along and they share something, and the Holy Spirit touches that person, and they go, yes, I'm ready. I want to commit. And I had the privilege of doing that, and that was a very exciting time doing that. So that's what we have. So now we would just like to open it up. So please, if you have any questions about the ministry, about us, please feel free to ask, and we'll try to answer them.
Knowing you're driving tonight
Mm-hmm.
on your way to Calgary, how long are you out there?
We're out in Alberta until Thanksgiving. We fly out on Thanksgiving on the red eye to head back down to the Dominican Republic.
Safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you.
The shoe boxes come from a couple sources. One is some of the shoe boxes come from some of our school sponsors, and they decide that they're going to do up a shoe box and send it down to the students that they sponsor. But the large majority of them come from a church in Charlotte, North Carolina, that about 12 years ago, they heard about our ministry, and they asked if they could partner with us. They decided they'd been doing Samaritan Purse. And Samaritan Purse does great work, so I'm not saying anything negative about them at all. They do wonderful, wonderful work. But they wanted something a little bit more personal. They wanted to know where the boxes were going and the kids that they were doing them for and that. So we provide them with a list of names and ages and birth dates, and they, in their community, raise up and actually put a cue card for each kid, and people come by the church, and even people that don't go to their church, so it's part of their outreach to their community as well, and they'll pick up a card and they'll go get a fill box for Maria or Jose or whoever the child is and bring it back. And there's a shipping company that each year donates the shipping, ships them to our mail service for free for them, and that's where the shoe boxes come from. And the more that people hear about it, some people send money to the church now and say, will you fill a few boxes and we'll pay for it, and those different routes. It's a good question, but it's a hard one to answer because it varies. For our university students, it could be anywhere from about $125, $30 per trimester to $600, $700, depending on the university and the program. So like a teacher will cost less than a doctor type of concept. Not so different than up here. For the K through 12, it depends what school they're going to and what age they're at. So as they go up, high school costs more than elementary school. And depending which school it is, it can be anywhere from $10 to $50 per month. And so with that, the sponsors are responsible to pay for the annual registration fee and the tuition. And that's the only financial commitment. If a sponsor decides to send out a gift or send a little something to help with school books or uniforms, that's totally up to them. But the commitment is the registration and the tuition, and 100% of that goes directly to that. There's no administration fees removed. We get about 100 patients a week. Sometimes less, sometimes a bit more, but the average is 90 to 100 a week.
And it's great that the doctor's a Christian and a counselor too, so she can be quite a witness to those people. That would be a good connection for you.
Yes, we're very thrilled with it, and the clinic runs on its own. So we're working ourselves out of a job.
Yes. Okay, so it is difficult to share. And you would wonder, well, why is that? Because if they're the Catholicism, they've got the Bible, they know, they hear about Jesus and that. But the problem is they're Catholic by birth quite often. They're not actually attending or studying or reading. It's part of the problem. So when we start to talk to them about it, they go, oh yeah, I know, I'm Catholic. And that just, they want to stop it at that. They think they've got it. But then if we get the opportunity to talk more and share, we can try to break through that. The other problem we have is there's an unfortunate division between the Catholics and what we call the evangelicals, the evangelical churches, so the other Christian churches, to the point where they won't communicate to each other, they won't get along. You can, if one person in the Catholic family accepts Jesus Christ and, starts to attend a local assemblies or a church, Christian church down there, the family members will actually disown them. And I can't think of the technical word for that, but they will start to shun them and not communicate. So we actually will get that. It's getting a little bit less, but it still happens. Another issue that we have is when we go into a new community to evangelize, the local priests there will quite often spread some rumors about the evangelicals and say, oh, don't let your kids go there. They're just going to steal your kids, stuff. Because they want to have the control and they want to be secure of what they're doing in their work. And there's a lot of miscommunications and things going on.
It's my first time to listen to your missionary story, your couple, and I just want to know about how is your Christian life journey. So you in your slide they say your missionary started in 1997. So I just wonder how do you get some information and starting to thinking of the pray and also the struggling from Calgary to Dominican Republic. So this is kind of the Christian growth journey. So maybe I don't know. So it's a little bit interesting. But this is I think is more encouraged for us to grow our Christian life. Thank you.
All
Okay.
right. Who's going to do this one?
All right. Paul comes from a non-Christian family. He was born and raised in Victoria. I also come from a non-Christian family. And I was born in Regina, moved to Fort McMurray when I was 2, and then to Victoria just before high school years. And I didn't know what a Bible was. I didn't know the word Bible. I'd never seen a Bible. I'd never touched a Bible. I had no idea what that was. And Paul's mom used to attend the United Church. And so there was a concept of God, and he knew what a Bible was, but they didn't go to church or anything like that. And Paul has a half-sister from his dad's first marriage, and she's a believer. And when Paul and his brother were 13 and 14, they went up to her farm, because she was already married and everything up in Fort St. John, and she led both of them to the Lord when he was 13. But because he came home, and there's no believers in his home, there was no growth. So it actually wasn't until he met me that he started to grow in the Lord. Not that it was my doing. He just hadn't been around any other Christians. In my case, there's a church in Sanshin Bible Fellowship, another assembly, and they had a very active youth group. Small church, active youth group. The youth group leaders were amazing. And it was through that youth group ministry that I came to know the Lord. And the only reason why I joined the youth group, I was a tomboy, a huge tomboy. I did not like even hanging out with girls. They were just too much drama. And this youth group had 20 guys and 1 girl. And I was 15. Why would you not? And every Friday night, they did guy stuff. Go-karting and water skiing and rock climbing. And I mean, why would I not? And it was through that youth group that I came to know the Lord. And it was actually through that youth group that I learned everything, because I didn't know what a Bible was, I didn't know what a missionary was, and the church would pray for missionaries, and there was 2 missionaries that they prayed for and talked about all the time. And I never met them or anything, but I knew their names because they were talked and prayed about all the time. And that was Eva Rashley and Sharon McIntosh. I didn't meet her till, I don't know, when did we actually meet face to face? Like 6, 7 years ago? But I've always known her name. I didn't know her story, but I knew her name. And then when I met Paul, I was teaching Sunday school. And so Paul would come he didn't want to go upstairs alone during the family service because he didn't know anybody. So he would assist me with my Sunday school and learn all the stories along with all the kids in Sunday school. And during our early years of marriage, the Anastasis, which was with Mercy Ships, was dry docked in Victoria. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. It was dry docked in Victoria for over a year. And they were always calling out to the churches for work teams to come to volunteer to do stuff on the ship to help save their expenses of having to hire people. And our youth group would go and do things, and that's when I learned about missions. And I said, yeah, Lord, never. I will do anything for you, but not that. And of course, we see how that worked. But so in 1995, we went with YWAM to do our discipleship training school on the Anastasis. And we were in Europe for that, and we did a 2-month outreach in Northern Ireland in 95, which was still during all of the IRA and all the Catholic Protestant fighting and bombing and all that, which we got very, very close to, too close. And we really felt called into missions during that school time. So we came back to Canada, focused on going into full-time missions, and we were going to go back with YWAM, and the Lord basically stopped us in our tracks because we weren't listening right. And he didn't want us to go back to the ship or to the ship's head office in Texas. And he froze us right where we were, which we were in Alberta at the time, for 4 months until we listened to him. And one day we're like, we're going nowhere, we need to do something. So we took a day of fasting and a day of prayer and didn't talk about anything to do with God during that time. And at the end of the day, came back together. And the only thing that either one of us received during that day of fasting and prayer was the Dominican Republic. And so that night we contacted YWAM in the Dominican Republic, and 3 weeks later we stepped off the plane. And we went down there on our 2-year plan, and as Paul likes to say, he's just waiting for God to say when that 2 years is going to start. So we've been there for 27 years. So in a nutshell, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could add something to that.
I was doing the short version.
I know you were, and it was great. But one of the things was when we got together and we prayed about, okay, Lord, what do you want in that? And we were reminded of the Dominican Republic, to go to the Dominican Republic. The question is, okay, now what do you do about that? And so we seeked counsel, and we asked the pastor, we said, okay, what should we do? And he recommended, he says, just take baby steps in that direction and see if the Lord opens the opportunities for you to continue. And so that's what we started to do. We thought there were baby steps, but the doors flew open, and as Sharon said, it was like 3 weeks, and we were getting off the plane into a country that we didn't even know anything about.
We had to look it up on a map.
Yeah.
We literally did not know where it was.
We couldn't speak a word of Spanish or anything, and we're getting off the plane to go there. So, all right.
Any other questions?
Maybe you share how you learned Spanish.
Okay. I'll share that when I learn. I'm still working on it. So, yeah, as we said, we got off the plane. We couldn't speak a word of Spanish. And we were in the Dominican Republic for about 2 months.
2 months.
And then we flew to Mexico, to Guadalajara. In Mexico, there is a school for Language Institute, and it's designed for missionaries. And what they say is they offer 2 things that missionaries don't have, and that is time and money. So it's inexpensive, and it's very condensed time, so you can get in there, learn the language, and get into the mission field quickly. We were there for 3 months, And that was long enough for us to get a foundation of the language. And then when we left Mexico, we flew directly to the Dominican Republic, and we stayed there for 3 years.
2.
It felt like 3. We stayed there for 2 years before we returned to Canada. And because we were there and we were immersed in it, and that helped us to develop it. And yes, Sharon is much more fluent in Spanish than I am. I struggle, but I get by, and it works. I'll preach.
He's better than he says. He preaches in Spanish.
But
So he does well.
it's my own type of Spanish. But yeah, that's how we learn.
Oh. Yes, Marie. So a number of years ago, I wrote a book called God Stories, 20 years, more than 20 years on the mission field. So if you like these little stories, this is a book full of these stories. And this is Marie's copy. And so if you'd like to read it, you can talk to her about borrowing it. If you want to buy it, it's very overpriced. I don't like the price of it. I don't have control of that, but it's very expensive. It's too expensive because I think it should be a $10 book. But it is available. You can get electronic, or you can purchase the physical at Chapters, Indigo, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and ChristianBooks.com. Or borrow it from Marie and don't pay anything.
Well, so far, there's one person lined up to read it, so you can add your name to that. It's an excellent book.
Okay.
All right. I just want to end with one little funny story. It's about learning the language. So we're in Mexico, and this is quite a few years back, and we were still doing those handwritten letters to people. And so we would write letters, and then we'd go down to the post office, and there was this Mexican man behind the counter, big, tall, strong Mexican, looked out of place. He was big. And we'd get there, and we'd give him our letters. He would weigh them. He would, on a calculator, tell how much we had to pay, and we would be discussing it back and forth because we couldn't understand, speak Spanish at the time. And he was very patient, and he would wait, and we sign languaged it, and we worked it out, and we'd pay. And this went on week after week after week. And finally, it was the last week. We're down there the last time, and we go in there, and we're doing the papers, and he gives us, he doesn't show us, he tells us the amount, because he's been doing that for a while. And he tells me the amount. I turned to Sharon, and I said, "How much is that?" And he says, in perfect English, "No, stop helping him. He needs to learn how to do this." For 3 months, he studied in the States, in college, and that, so he was fluent in English. And for 3 months, he didn't say a word in English and made us suffer and struggle through that. So we're going to wrap it up now. I just want to thank you guys so much for the warmth and the love that we feel with this church and the congregation, and the welcoming we've had from this morning to the wonderful meal, and for our time and giving us the opportunity to share what God is doing here. And I just want to thank you all so much for that. Your prayers are so appreciated. We really do count your prayers and your prayer coverage for us. Thank you very much. Amen.